Sophia, just sit quietly and take notes. Let the real negotiators handle this, Richard Halden said, without even glancing up from his papers. The conference room went silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning. I tightened my grip on the pen, the sting of yet another dismissal settling over me. This was supposed to be the biggest deal of my career at Crestline Studios in Portland, Oregon. But once again, I was being pushed into secretary duty while my male colleagues positioned themselves to take credit for months of my work. My name is Sophia Liang. I'm 34 years old, and for the past 6 years, I've been a senior business development manager at this mid-sized entertainment production company. I've consistently secured major international partnerships that kept us profitable. Yet, when it came time to close deals, I was routinely sidelined, so Richard and his boys' club could swoop in for the glory. Today, however, was different. I had information they didn't even suspect I possessed. The investor we were meeting with was Li Wen, founder of Golden Phoenix Entertainment, one of Asia's largest media conglomerates, valued at over $2 billion. This partnership could triple our revenue in 2 years. I had spent 8 months building this relationship, studying his business philosophy, learning about his family traditions, and perfecting my Mandarin through intensive courses I paid for myself. Richard and his crew knew none of this. Richard, I should mention that Mr. Li prefers, I began, but he cut me off with a dismissive wave. Sophia, please, we've got this handled. Just focus on getting good notes for the follow-up report. His condescending smile made my stomach turn. Beside him, Mark Allen and Victor Cruz nodded smugly in their designer suits. They had no idea their arrogance was about to cost them dearly. Li Wen's assistant had texted me 30 minutes earlier, letting me know he would arrive ahead of schedule and that he specifically wanted to speak with the woman who understands his vision. They thought it was a translation error. I knew better. The so-called solid ground under their feet was quicksand, and I was ready to pull the rug out from under them in a way they'd never recover from. The path to this moment started 3 years ago, when I first began handling international partnerships. I'd always been fascinated by cultures and languages. But it wasn't until I met Li Wen at a trade conference in Los Angeles that I realized how badly my company was failing by sending culturally tone-deaf negotiators to sensitive international meetings. I grew up in a working-class family in Sacramento, where I learned early that success wasn't just about talent. It was about strategy, patience, and spotting opportunities others missed. My parents, both teachers, sacrificed to send me to business school. I promised I'd never waste that gift. When I joined Crestline Studios, I thought I'd found a progressive creative environment. The company produced independent films and documentaries addressing important social issues. But inside the corporate structure, their progressive values vanished. The executive team was all male, and despite my MBA from Stanford and a proven record in deal-making, I was passed over for promotion while less qualified men climbed the ladder. Richard Halden, our director of business development, was my biggest obstacle. At 42, he had an old-school charm that impressed older executives, but little grasp of modern global business. He thrived on handshake deals with local distributors, clueless about the cultural nuance essential for international success. When I introduced Golden Phoenix Entertainment as a prospect, Richard immediately claimed he had found the opportunity and put himself forward as lead negotiator. Mark Allen, our marketing director, was his devoted yes man, adding nothing but echoes to Richard's ideas. Victor Cruz, the finance director, was more competent but equally dismissive of me. Together, they were an impenetrable wall of masculine mediocrity. What they didn't know was that Li Wen had sought me out after our first meeting, impressed by my genuine interest in Chinese business culture. Over 8 months, we exchanged countless emails on topics ranging from market trends to philosophy. I told him about my Mandarin studies. He encouraged me, recommending specific texts to master business formality. The irony was rich. While Richard and his team prepared a hard-sell American-style pitch, Li Wen expected a thoughtful, culturally sensitive discussion about long-term goals. They were heading for a cultural landmine, and I alone had the map. 2 weeks before the meeting, during a quarterly review, I presented preliminary terms I'd negotiated with Golden Phoenix terms, far better than anything in company history. A 3-year exclusive distribution deal, $15 million in guaranteed advances, and profit sharing that could add another $20 million annually. The room was silent as the numbers sank in. "Excellent work, Richard," said CEO Paul Whitmore, without even looking at me. I started to speak up, but Richard cut in smoothly. Sophia's been great support, really solid note-taking and research assistance. The warning look he shot me said, "Stay in your lane." That night, I stared at the contract I had carefully built, each clause the product of deep research into Chinese business law and cultural preference. Li Wen had praised my grasp of guanxi, the intricate web of relationships and obligations central to Chinese business. Watching them prepare to take credit yet again, I made my choice. I called Li Wen's assistant and arranged a private meeting to discuss cultural preparation for the negotiation. On that video call, conducted entirely in Mandarin, Li Wen spoke frankly about his frustration with American executives who ignored Chinese customs or the philosophical depth behind true business partnerships. "Sophia," he said in perfect English for emphasis, "business is about more than contracts. It's about trust, respect, and shared vision." I assured him I shared that understanding, even knowing Richard's team did not. That conversation planted the seed for everything that came next. They had underestimated me for years, assuming I was just a background researcher. They didn't realize that, in the modern global market, cultural competence outweighed ego, and I was the only one at the table who had it. The morning of the meeting, under Portland's steady drizzle, I arrived an hour early. I'd arranged the conference room exactly to Li Wen's preferences. Chairs facing east, green tea instead of coffee, and no red ink in any materials. Richard, Mark, and Victor arrived buzzing with excitement, rehearsing their pitch. Richard had even bought a new tie navy with gold threading, probably thinking it looked international. "Sophia, make sure you get everything down," Richard said. "This'll be a masterclass in negotiation. You might learn something." I only smiled and counted the minutes until their downfall began. At exactly 2 p.m., Li Wen arrived, impeccably dressed, formal but cool in demeanor. Richard lunged forward with an aggressive handshake. "Mr. Li, welcome to Crestline Studios. We're thrilled to close this deal with you." Li Wen's expression stayed neutral, though his eyes lingered on me for a heartbeat longer. Richard launched into his pitch, immediately leading with money and insult in Chinese business etiquette. Li Wen's eyes tightened almost imperceptibly. Mark jumped in, blithely pushing product placements and American brands into the Chinese market. Li Wen's expression cooled further. Victor offered numbers, fast returns, rapid growth, but missed the point entirely. Finally, Li Wen spoke, his voice precise and calm. "Gentlemen, I believe there's a misunderstanding. My focus is cultural exchange, respect, and sustainable growth. What you describe sounds colonial." Richard laughed nervously. "Come on, Mr. Li. This is just good business. Everybody wins." "Move fast and break things, as you Americans say," Li Wen replied, the deliberate misquote a quiet rebuke. Mark laughed, missing the insult entirely. Victor tried again, but Li Wen turned to him patiently. "Profitability is not my primary concern. I want content that bridges cultures, tells authentic stories, and builds understanding. That requires partners who share these values." The three men floundered. Then Richard made the mistake I'd been waiting for. "That's why we brought Sophia," he said. "She's been researching the cultural side of things." For the first time, Li Wen's interest sharpened. The others looked at me like I was their lifeline. I set my pen down and closed my notebook. "Mr. Li," I began, "the issue here is that Richard's team approaches this as a simple transaction content for money." Richard nodded, thinking I was agreeing. "Actually, Richard, that's exactly why this approach is wrong for this partnership." Then I switched to Mandarin. "Respected sir, I believe we must restart this conversation. My colleagues do not understand the complexity of building a true partnership." Li Wen's demeanor shifted instantly, engaged, respectful. His assistants straightened in their seats. Richard's jaw dropped. "Since when do you speak Chinese?" he blurted. I ignored him. I outlined a vision based on shared values and long-term goals. Li Wen responded warmly, matching my language. Richard eventually interrupted, desperate. "Sophia, can you translate so we're all on the same page?" I met his eyes. "Actually, Richard, Mr. Li and I are discussing whether to move forward at all, given the misalignment he's observed." Li Wen nodded gravely. "Miss Liang has expressed my concerns exactly. This partnership must be built on respect and vision, not just profit." I stood. "Mr. Li, perhaps we should discuss this under a different arrangement. My independent consulting rate is 15 of the deal value. Shall we proceed without them?" "Yes," Li Wen said immediately. "That would be my preference." The silence was suffocating. Richard's face went from confusion to horror. Mark looked stunned. Victor rifled through his papers like they could save him. "Wait, you can't do this, Sophia! This is Cressline's client!" Richard barked. I calmly gathered my things. "Actually, Richard, every meaningful conversation with Golden Phoenix Entertainment has been with Sophia Liang Consulting. I've documented everything for 8 months." Li Wen's assistant was already scheduling our next meeting. "Your client?" I said, turning to Richard. "You've spent the past hour insulting him and proving you don't understand his values. That's not a relationship. That's sabotage." Li Wen rose and shook my hand with formal respect. "Miss Liang, I look forward to our continued collaboration." As he left, I turned to my former colleagues. "Every time you push me aside, you trained Mr. Li to see me as the competent professional and you as the obstacles." Victor finally spoke. "The company will sue you." "There's nothing to sue for," I said. "You destroyed the deal yourselves. I'm salvaging what you broke." Li Wen paused in the doorway. "Gentlemen, she did not steal this opportunity. You gave it to her." Within 3 months of my departure, Crestline's international division collapsed. Richard was demoted to regional sales coordinator, Mark was fired, and Victor took a pay cut and was sent to cultural sensitivity training. Meanwhile, I sat in my new office overlooking the Willamette River, fielding offers from 3 major Asian conglomerates. My victory wasn't about revenge born of anger. It was about refusing to let people who couldn't see my worth decide it for me. And sometimes, the sweetest victory is letting your enemies destroy themselves. A week after signing the contract with Li Wen, I sat in my new office, watching the wide ribbon of the Willamette River through the window. The air still carried the faint scent of fresh furniture and the subtle aroma of green tea, a habit I'd picked up over the last several months. My desk was piled with letters and proposals from companies that, just a year ago, wouldn't have even returned my calls. Now they were seeking me out. The first announcement came when Golden Phoenix Entertainment released a press statement about our partnership. My name appeared side by side with Li Wen's, more than just recognition. It was a public signal that I had earned a place in the inner circle of one of Asia's most powerful media conglomerates. That same day, an email arrived from a Singaporean studio, followed by one from a Tokyo-based animation agency, and then another from an Indian production house. They all wanted to work directly with me. I couldn't help but think back to my days at Crestline Studios, when I was told to stay in my seat and keep quiet. Now, every word I spoke, every decision I made carried weight. The irony was that my strategy hadn't changed at all. I was still relying on respect, cultural understanding, and long-term connections. The only difference was the stage I was playing on. A month later, Li Wen invited me to Beijing for a private meeting with his board of directors. I knew this wasn't just another business trip. It was a test. In Chinese business culture, results matter, but so does how you conduct yourself in informal settings. We dined at a round table where dishes were served in precise sequence, and every toast was more than a gesture. It was a carefully crafted message. I spoke little, but each word I chose was deliberate. When the evening ended, Li Wen leaned toward me and said quietly, "Sophia, tonight you achieved more than in the negotiations themselves. You showed that you understand not just the words, but the pauses between them." On the ride back to my hotel, it struck me how, just a few years ago, I had been chasing promotions at Crestline, and now my career growth was happening on a completely different level, one my former colleagues couldn't even imagine. Meanwhile, news outlets began running stories on the collapse of Crestline Studios' international division. Business Horizons devoted an entire column to what they called the corporate blunder of the decade, citing arrogance, ignorance, and a total lack of cultural competence as the root cause. Richard Holden's name appeared more often than any other. Journalists called, asking for my comment, but my answer was always the same. I don't deal in other people's mistakes. I focus on my own work, and deep down I knew. The best response to everything they had done to me wasn't anger or retaliation. It was success. Undeniable, unstoppable success. And it was only just beginning. 3 months into my partnership with Golden Phoenix Entertainment, my calendar was a carefully balanced chaos. Morning calls with Singapore, late-night video conferences with Tokyo, weekend strategy sessions with Mumbai. My workdays stretched into 15-hour marathons, but for the first time in years, the exhaustion felt like a privilege. By early spring, I had quietly established Liang Global Strategies, a boutique consulting firm specializing in cross-cultural entertainment partnerships. The name was already circulating in industry circles, whispered with the kind of respect reserved for those who had pulled off the impossible. It was during one of those long evenings in the office, reviewing a co-production proposal between a Korean drama studio and a Los Angeles streaming giant, that my assistant, Emily, stepped in. "There's someone asking to see you. No appointment," she said, her tone carefully neutral. I was about to refuse when she added, "He says it's urgent, and he used to work at Crestline Studios." My pen froze above the page. "Name? Mark Allen?" I leaned back in my chair, the memories slotting into place like puzzle pieces I'd rather have left scattered. Richard's loyal echo. The man who once smirked when I was told to just take notes. "Send him in." When Mark entered, he looked nothing like the polished marketing director I remembered. His tailored suits had been replaced by an off-the-rack blazer that hung loosely from his frame, and there was a nervous tension in his movements. "Sophia," he began, avoiding my eyes, "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, but I need your help." I stayed silent, letting him twist in the weight of his own words. He cleared his throat. "After Crestline let me go, I tried freelancing, but nothing stuck. Now there's a small European media company interested in entering the Asian market. They asked me to find someone with strong cross-cultural connections. And your name came up several times." I tilted my head. "Let me guess. You told them you could bring me in?" His cheeks flushed. "Not exactly. I told them I knew you, and that maybe you'd be open to talking." There it was. The quiet desperation, the realization that the same woman he once dismissed now held the keys to the kind of opportunity he couldn't secure alone. I leaned forward. "Mark, I built everything I have now because I refused to work with people who saw me as expendable. You were part of that problem." "I know," he said quickly, "and I regret it. Every single day, I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to let me prove I've changed." I studied him for a long moment, weighing the sincerity in his voice against the memory of his smirk in that conference room. "Send me the company profile," I said finally. "I'll decide after I see it." His shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you. I mean it." After he left, I stood by the window, the city lights reflecting off the river. It struck me how strange power can feel when it shifts. Not loud or explosive, but quiet and absolute. I wasn't sure yet whether I would help him. But one thing was certain. The past wasn't done with me. And in business, the past has a way of arriving dressed as opportunity. 2 days later, the company profile from Mark landed in my inbox. Lumière Europa Media, a mid-sized French production house with a clean, modern slate of independent films and a modest streaming platform. Ambitious, but clearly under-resourced for a large-scale Asian expansion. Their pitch was simple. Partner with an established Asian studio to co-produce and distribute content tailored for both European and Asian audiences. The potential upside was obvious, but so was the risk. I agreed to a preliminary meeting, not for Mark's sake, but because I could already see how this could be positioned alongside my existing network. What I didn't anticipate was who Lumière would send to represent their Asian interests. When I walked into the glass-walled conference room of a downtown Portland hotel, I froze for just a fraction of a second. Sitting across from the Lumière executives, impeccably dressed and smiling faintly, was none other than Richard Holden. For a heartbeat, the air felt heavier. Richard, the man who had spent years underestimating me, now sitting on the opposite side of a table I controlled. He didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, there was a flicker of something else. Wariness. "Sophia," he said smoothly, rising to shake my hand. "It's been a while." I took his hand, meeting his gaze without flinching, long enough for the tables to turn. The Lumière CEO, a silver-haired man named François Delacroix, gestured for us to sit. "I understand you two have worked together before?" Richard smiled politely. "You could say that. Sophia was part of my team at Crestline." I let the comment hang for a second before replying evenly, "I led the deal he's most famous for losing." Delacroix chuckled, glancing between us. "Well, perhaps this time you'll both be on the same side." The meeting began, but I barely heard the opening pleasantries. I was too busy reading Richard. He wasn't here by accident. Lumiere needed someone with Asian market experience, but clearly didn't have the right connections. And somehow, Richard had positioned himself as their bridge. Half an hour in, Francois turned to me. "Miss Liang, Lumiere would like to explore your network in Asia. We believe a partnership with you could unlock markets we've struggled to enter." I leaned back slightly. "And what exactly would Mr. Holden's role be in this?" Francois glanced at Richard, then back at me. "He's been advising us on market strategy. We were hoping you might collaborate." Collaborate. The word tasted bitter. Richard leaned forward, voice smooth as glass. "Sophia, I think we both know what's at stake here. You have the contacts. I understand Lumiere's production model. Together, we'd be a disaster." I cut in before he could finish. "Your idea of strategy involves barging into a market without understanding it. Mine involves listening before speaking." The room went quiet. Francois shifted uncomfortably. I could have walked away right there. But instead, I said, "I'll consider the deal. On one condition. I lead all negotiations with the Asian partners. Alone. Mr. Holden can remain in an advisory role for Lumiere's internal operations, but he won't touch the partnership side." Richard's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Francois looked between us, sensing the history but clearly eager for the deal. Finally he nodded. Agreed. As the meeting wrapped up, Richard lingered behind. "You know," he said quietly, "one day you might need me." I met his gaze, my voice cool. "Richard, you needed me years ago. You just didn't know it, and by the time you realized, it was already too late." Walking out of that conference room, I felt the familiar hum of power. Not the kind that comes from winning a single battle, but the kind that builds when your enemies have no choice but to work on your terms. What I didn't know was that agreeing to this deal would put me in the middle of a conflict far larger than any I had faced before. One that would blur the line between partnership and betrayal. 2 weeks into the preliminary talks with Lumiere Europa Media, the deal looked promising on paper. I had already set up exploratory calls with 3 of my most trusted contacts, a Seoul-based drama studio, a Hong Kong distribution network, and a Singaporean investment group. Each one had responded positively, largely because my name was attached to the proposal. But if there's one thing I've learned in international business, it's that momentum can vanish overnight, especially when someone is quietly working against you. It started with a single email. One of my Singaporean contacts forwarded me a message they'd received from Richard. "Between us, I wouldn't commit too quickly. There are ongoing issues with Liang Global Strategy's operational stability. Lumiere is considering alternative consultants with a stronger track record in the large-scale distribution." The arrogance of it was breathtaking. Richard was sowing doubt about my credibility with people I had built relationships with for years. Worse, he had done it under the guise of protecting Lumiere's interests. I didn't react immediately. A direct confrontation this early would only give him the satisfaction of knowing he'd gotten under my skin. Instead, I began collecting everything. Every whisper, every offhand comment he made to contacts, every discrepancy in what Lumiere executives thought I'd said versus what I had actually said. By the 3rd week, the pattern was clear. Richard was running a shadow campaign, painting me as an unreliable risk while positioning himself as the safer alternative for Lumiere's Asian expansion. The real question wasn't why he was doing it. I knew exactly why. It was the oldest instinct in corporate survival. If you can't outperform someone, undermine them. The question was, how far was I willing to let him go before I pulled the trigger? I didn't have to wait long for my answer. One Thursday morning, Francois called me unexpectedly. "Sophia," he began, his tone cautious, "Richard tells me you've been having trouble securing firm commitments from our potential partners." I smiled, even though he couldn't see me. "Francois, would you like me to forward you the signed letters of intent from all 3 of them? Dated this week?" There was a pause. "Signed?" "Yes. Which means Richard has been feeding you false information. And if he's willing to mislead you about that, I'd suggest you consider what else he's misrepresented." By the time we hung up, I knew Richard's position had been damaged, but I also knew he wouldn't stop. He'd just get quieter, more careful, more dangerous. That evening, I received a call from my Hong Kong contact. "Sophia," she said in Mandarin, "your associate is approaching us directly, offering a better deal if we work with him instead." That was it. The line had been crossed. I booked a flight to Paris, Lumiere's headquarters, for the following Monday. If Richard wanted to play his game, he was going to have to do it with the entire board of directors watching. And I was going to make sure that when the dust settled, there would be no shadow left for him to hide in. The winter air in Paris had a bite to it, sharp enough to wake even the most jet-lagged traveler. I arrived at Lumiere Europa Media's headquarters on the Rue de Rivoli early, wearing a charcoal gray suit and the calm expression of someone holding all the winning cards. The boardroom was everything you'd expect from a European production powerhouse. Polished walnut table, floor-to-ceiling windows, and framed posters of their award-winning films. The entire executive board was there, along with Francois and, of course, Richard. He greeted me with that same manufactured charm I'd seen him use 100 times before. "Sophia," he said smoothly, "glad you could make it. I've already briefed the board on where we stand." "Good," I replied evenly, taking my seat. "Then I'll just correct a few things." A flicker of unease crossed his face. Francois nodded for me to begin. I slid a neatly organized folder across the table to each board member. Inside were printed emails, signed letters of intent from all 3 of my Asian contacts, and a timeline of communications, each one proving Richard had been spreading misinformation. "Gentlemen, madame," I began, "I was under the impression this partnership was based on mutual trust. What you see in front of you is evidence that one member of your advisory team has been actively undermining your lead negotiator, me, in an attempt to position himself as your sole representative in Asia." The room was silent except for the faint rustle of papers. Francois looked at Richard. "Is this true?" Richard's smile faltered. "This is being taken out of context." "Context?" I cut in, my tone still calm but sharper now. "Contacting my partners directly, offering alternative deals behind Lumiere's back, telling your own CEO that commitments didn't exist when they were already signed. That's not context, Richard. That's sabotage." One of the board members, a stern-looking woman named Claire Dufour, leaned forward. "Mr. Halden, do you deny sending these emails?" Richard hesitated for a fraction too long. It was enough. Claire turned to Francois. "If Lumiere is serious about expanding into Asia, I suggest we remove any element that threatens that goal, effective immediately." Francois exhaled slowly, then looked at Richard. "Your advisory role is terminated. Security will arrange your departure from the building today." The color drained from his face, but he didn't argue. 2 guards appeared at the door, and Richard left without another word, his eyes fixed anywhere but on me. When the door closed, Francois turned back to me. "Miss Liang, I hope this hasn't shaken your confidence in our company. The board and I would like you to lead the expansion, with full authority." I allowed myself a small, measured smile. "Then let's begin." By the time my plane lifted off from Charles de Gaulle 2 days later, contracts were already in motion. The Lumiere-Liang partnership would be announced in the spring, complete with joint ventures across 3 countries. As the city lights of Paris faded below me, I thought about the long road from that conference room at Kreslin Studios. The smirks, the dismissals, the stolen credit. They had all led me here to a place where my work spoke louder than anyone's attempt to silence it. In business, people often talk about winning or losing. But the truth is, the real victory isn't in defeating someone else. It's in building something so strong they can never take it from you. And I had just built an empire. 6 months later, I was in Shanghai for a Golden Phoenix Entertainment Gala, seated at the head table beside Li Wen and several of Asia's top media executives. Cameras flashed, and journalists moved between tables like currents in a busy river. During the dessert course, Li Wen leaned over. "Sophia, there's someone here who says he knows you." He seemed eager to reconnect. I followed his gaze across the ballroom, and there he was. Richard Holden, dressed in a slightly ill-fitting tuxedo, standing near the edge of the crowd with a champagne flute he didn't seem to know what to do with. He spotted me and began making his way over. When he reached the table, his smile was tentative, almost cautious. "Sophia," he said, "I just wanted to congratulate you. Everything you've done. It's remarkable." I held his gaze for a long moment, then gestured to the chair beside me. "Take a seat." His eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise, but he sat. I poured him a cup of green tea from the pot in front of us, the same gesture I had once arranged for Li Wen in that fateful Portland meeting. "You know," I said, my tone calm but deliberate, The last time we sat across a table together, you told me to stay quiet and take notes." Richard gave a short, awkward laugh. "Yes, well, I was wrong about a lot of things." I smiled, not out of forgiveness, but because the circle was complete. "I know." Li Wen's toast began a moment later, drawing the attention of the entire room. As I raised my glass, I realized that the real satisfaction didn't come from Richard seeing me here. It came from knowing that even if he spent the rest of his life chasing opportunities, he would always remember the moment he lost the one that mattered most, and that memory would be mine to keep.